Thank you, Andrew. Uh, Welcome everyone to the session. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, the title, so I've tried to keep it short in terms of just calling it intro rather than introduction, otherwise it'll look like an essay. What we're going to do here, sorry, just let me share the screen. And yeah, so in terms of what we're going to cover today, I thought it'll be good to kind of and do the topics at the outset so that we can navigate our way through much better in terms of understanding what we are covering. We'll do the introductions in terms of what a COE is. I'm not going to labor the point on how you establish a COE in your organization, because I'm sure a lot of people are experts in terms of how they want to do the governance and everything else. But it is more in terms of trying to show the fact that the COE kit is there to support you through the journey, rather than trying to govern how you do the COE, how you establish a COE. And then we'll take a look at the breakdown of the COE kit. So once you download the COE kit, what you'll see is there's a lot of lots of solutions and folders and files. So trying to get your head around it can be challenging at the outset as to what does it all mean. So what I've tried to do is kind of break that down into logical components to explain that. Then we look at the overview of the admin module, which is one of the first modules and the core module really. Then we look at the overview of the governance module, and then we'll move on to the nurture module. There is a fourth component that has recently come in, which is the theming one. I'm not going to cover that in detail because it's a recent addition. It's a great component in the toolkit, but it's more in terms of theming and look and feel. So it's kind of fairly self-explanatory. As long as you have a basic understanding of the first three, you should be able to quite easily understand what the theming module does. And then we'll do a walkthrough of two processes that I've picked. One is the app auditing process, and the other one is training management process that this toolkit enables. Finally, we'll look at a few limitations that are there in the current toolkit. So it's not kind of it is a massively great kit in terms of trying to achieve what it's trying to achieve, but obviously it comes with limitations, and the COE team is working to get over the limitations as well. But we need to understand what the limitations are. Um, a brief introduction about myself. I'm a Power Platform COE solution architect, and I work for Avanade UK. And that's my LinkedIn profile URL if anyone would like to connect with me. Okay, let's dive in. So what is a Power Platform COE toolkit? Now, I've just lifted this definition of a COE straight off the link that's there below. COE is an organization that drives innovation and improvement and brings together like-minded people with similar business goals, while at the same time providing standards and consistency and governance to the organization. So what that really means is you're talking about a group of people who are trying to bring excellence into a specific platform within the organization and trying to kind of enforce best practices, and at the same time encouraging people to adopt the platform. It could be, a generic COE. It could be a COE which is specific to one platform. In this case, Power Platform. What the COE starter kit really does in this case is it's basically a set of tools that are designed to help you get started with developing a strategy and supporting you through that journey. It's what it is not is trying to establish a COE for you. What it is basically a collection of tools to support you through that journey. Just want to make that clear. Okay, now I've taken this slide from one of the COE presentations, and I quite like this slide, and that's why I thought let's put this in. And this is really an interesting graphical view of when exactly the COE excellence is more effective as you're ramping up with your Power Platform journey. Having said that, the thought process behind establishing the COE should start much earlier as you start to ramp up with makers adopting the platform and dishing out apps at breakneck speed so that you're well prepared for the barrage of apps that will be created, and the accompanying connectors that will reach out to all the data points inside and outside the organization. So having said that, I mean, it's not the center of excellence. Establishing a COE and adopting the kit shouldn't start at the point of where I've kind of mentioned COE in the diagram there. The thought process should start much earlier, but that is kind of the optimal point where it will really start showing you value in terms of as the apps are picking up and as the pace is being gathered in terms of number of apps being created and connectors being created and flows being created. So we'll see how it really helps. Moving on. As I said, so there are 4 building blocks of the COE kit. When we say building blocks, because it's basically a file that you get when you download the whole kit. It's basically a set of files and solutions, but logically breaking it down, it kind of comes into 4 main building blocks. First is the administration, which is basically gaining insights into your Power Platform adoption. So it's basically kind of gathering the insights that you might have as a result of the platform being used. It basically, what is the value drives? It's giving you the analytics that are coming alive. It showcases the value of the analytics. It creates enterprise awareness and excitement. And then you have once you've established the administration side of things and you've taken stock of how the things are happening on your platform, how the apps are being created, then you move on to the governance process. You start taking control in terms of driving higher standards and auditing the apps as they are being created from cradle to grave, the whole process. And then you move on to the nurture process, which is basically where you're establishing the process of encouraging more and more makers coming onto the platform, and then guiding them through the journey, educating them through as a part of the platform, picking out evangelists who can actually kind of help the new makers coming onto the platform as well. And then finally, the theming part that I mentioned earlier, that's more in terms of the look and feel aspects. But the value it brings is that it lets people concentrate on the actual business problems without worrying about the consistent look and feel. Interesting point here, this theming component was actually created on the back of work one of the MVPs did. I think it was Sancho Harkar who created this this interesting theming component in his own organization, and I think Microsoft picked that up and included that in the COE kit. So that's a great example of how Microsoft and the community have been working together to kind of mature the COE kit. Next, we'll move into the so we looked at the logical components, if you like, of the platform. Now what we look at is when you actually download the actual starter kit. The view on the bottom right is what you get out of downloading the kit. It's like I said, it's a bunch of managed solutions and a couple of folders that you get. So when I first kind of started looking at it, I couldn't get my head around, okay, how does it actually kind of relate to the logical components that we're talking about? So what I've done here is kind of created a color-coded map, if you like, to explain which components kind of relate to which logical bit that we talked about in the previous slide. So as you can see, the ones in green are actually more in the administration side of things. So you get a core component. Okay, another point, taking a step back, is you can divide the whole kit into 2 parts. One is solution aware components and the other one is non-solution aware components. So you've got managed solutions, but there are other non-solution aware bits that are also there to help you to kind of go through the configuration process, which you look at in detail as we go along, but I'll explain that down the line. So going back to that point, so administration has the core component solution. You have the audit log solution, and then there are no non-solution aware components, as in the Power BI dashboard, and there are a couple of Canvas apps that have to be embedded within the Power BI dashboard that are also available as part of the COE toolkit. So you have to kind of configure them so that they can be included in the Power BI dashboard. And then you have some SharePoint templates that are available. One example here is the nurture solution. So you have a managed solution for the nurture part of it. And then there is a template available to be able to create a folder where you can actually start creating templates that people can pick up when they start building the apps from the word go. So it gives them that kind of kickstart in terms of the readily available templates. So that component there, SharePoint template library, that's actually a flow that you can configure in your organization, which will then create that appropriate template library within your organization. Moving on. So as I said, administration is basically the core components that you've got within the managed solution. What I've done is I've kind of grouped it into 3. So I've included 3 parts into it because Once you establish the core component, the managed solution, you configure and set it up. You also have to have the audit logs configured as well. When I say audit logs, this is more in terms of talking to Office 365 compliance logs that are being generated, and then gathering that data. And that data that is being gathered is then hooked up to the Power BI dashboard that we'll see in a minute. So these are kind of the three core components of the administration module, if you like. What we'll do is we'll deep dive into the administration part now, and then we look at the rest of the components as we go along. So this is basically the core solution for administration. It consists of, as you can see on the left, top left, is a couple of flows. It has about, I think, 8 to 10 flows that are there. You have one model-driven app and a couple of Canvas apps available within it. And a bunch of entities that come as part of the solution as you install the solution. Now, you must be seeing there is that we're actually creating a COE kit using the Power Platform itself. So it's basically hitting our own dog food in terms of using the same platform to actually create a COE kit to kind of enable people to ramp up. So that's basically the core solution. Now, this is a nice picture that I kind of put a lot of effort in trying to put this together. What it does in a single slide is explain how the whole administration piece hangs together. So what I've done here is what you have as part of this is you have a couple of flows. You start with the COE admin sync template flow. That is the starting point where it actually starts. It is a scheduled flow that runs every day. What it does is it gathers the information about your environments. So you might have more than one kind of environment set up in your organization. It goes and looks at all the environments every day and updates the information in terms of the environments that are existing in your platform. Once that is done, the rest of the flows then trigger on the back of the information being populated in the environment entity. And then they start doing their work in terms of gathering information about the apps, the connectors, the flows, the model-driven apps, and any errors that might be encountered. So all these flows are then triggered on the back of this parent flow, and then they start populating the entities that are shown in the diagram below and the information that they hold. So just taking an example, when we say Power Apps app entity, it holds the information about the app in terms of when it was last launched, what's the classification in terms of the app, how many shared users, is it an orphaned app? So it gets all that information and starts populating that on the back of the parent flow that is run on a daily basis. So this is information that is being gathered periodically on the platform, and that kind of becomes your baseline for all the apps that you're seeing on the top. So you have a model-driven app, which is basically sitting on the top of the data that is being gathered via these flows and showing all that information across to the COE administrators. You can call this more of a cut down version of the Power BI dashboard that we'll see in a minute, because Power BI dashboard gives you more detailed overview, but this is kind of giving you more real-time view of what is going on in the entire environment. Next is the couple of Canvas apps that are also sitting on top, which is one prominent one here is the DLP customizer. So what that does is it actually gives you a view of you would have DLP policies configured in your environment. So it'll actually go fetch all the apps and then show you a view of which apps are compliant with your DLP policy, which aren't. So it kind of gives you an overview of the level of compliance alongside the connectors that are sitting in your organization. So that's kind of the structure of the administration tool, if you like. One more important point I wanted to relay here was this is very, very important. When you are creating your COE kit, when you're setting this up, always make sure that you are creating a separate dedicated environment for COE and not using any of the shared existing environments that are being used for developing the apps. And this is important because the DLP policy that you would create for all the admin flows and connectors that you will use would then not clash with the other environments. You should have your own dedicated environment where you're actually setting up the all of the COE components, if you like. Again, this is so let's have a look at establishing that code, how do you actually go about configuring the core solution that I talked about. A few prerequisites before you do that. You should be a service admin or a D365 admin with access to all the tenant resources. And as I said before, you should ideally have a dedicated environment with the CDS instance, which I explained is because of the DLP policy clash that you might have, and also keeps it clean and keeps all the analytics data that is being generated away from the admin bits that you configure in the environment. And also you need a premium license because it'll use common data service in the background, which is DataFlex Pro. This slide was done before the DataFlex Pro branding came in, so hence I'm still using the word CDS. So as we said, starting with the first solution, so you have the Center of Excellence Core Components Managed solution that you will install as part of the administration piece. That's the first solution that you install. Once you install the solution, there are a couple of environment variables, and there is a COE settings entity that comes as part of the managed solution. So these are the two places where you have to kind of put some of the system parameters, if you like. Now, one important point to note here is that the environment variable concept obviously was new when before the COE settings entity was created. So all the COE setting entity parameters I envision will eventually move to the environment variables at some point maybe. So these are kind of the environment variables that you'll create. Firstly is the URL of the flow environment that you're using. So whichever region you are, obviously you have the URL of the flow instance is where they'll be hosted. So you need to kind of configure that. There is an admin email that you need to put, which will be used in the various flows as part of the communication. Then there's an email header style that you can configure, and also there's a flag which is also delete from COE. What this does is if you configure this as no, so any of the apps that or the flows that will be archived, and when we say archival, I'll come to that in a minute, but there are certain criteria that you can define which define that this app or this flow is not being used. So it comes into a category or a candidate of something that can be deleted or archived. But what you can do with this flag is say whether it needs to be deleted or it is just a flag that kind of enables that this is an archived app, and then it is moved to the SharePoint library for archival. Then you have the environment variables, the COE settings entity, which then starts storing the parameters that are specified on the screen here. It's the company name, the logo, the brand, primary color, secondary color. It's self-explanatory in terms of the fields that are there. One point to note here is this entity is obviously part of the solution, and it is accessible as part of the model-driven app that I explained about. Maybe what I can do is I can quickly show you the app as well, and then we can actually look at this entity in itself. So if I go to the Power Platform admin view, the app that we were just talking about, which is part of the admin module, that's the app that is basically gathering all the information about your environment and kind of showing that in a dashboard. And the entity that we talked about is the COE settings entity, and that's where you would create the values. You would configure the values for all the parameters that we just discussed. Moving on. Now, this is where you start configuring the flow. So we've taken first step. We've installed the solution. Now what we're going to do is, we've installed the solution. We've configured this COE settings entity. We've configured the environment variables. And now we start looking at the configuration of the various flows that I talked about. So, the parent flow and the child flows that kind of trigger on the back of the data that is populated in the environment entity. So before I talk about the configuration of the underlying flows, just want to talk about an important point here. COE is essentially a collaboration between Microsoft and the community. It is updated on an average each month. So the whole system has been designed such that you can bring in new updates so that they can bring in new updates in terms of new Canvas apps, new flows, and those updates are applied as they come in. So any changes or extensions we make, if they clash with the changes we make ourselves, it's down to us to kind of really harmonize that along with the updates that are coming along. One special consideration here is with the flows. So as with the flows, you have to configure all the connections info. So when you are when you configure connections, you're making changes to the flow, and with the new versions coming in, the changes can be overridden. So in order to avoid that, what you have to do is when you configure these flows, you have to save them as a copy rather than modifying the solution, the elements in the solution itself. So you create a copy of these flows and save them outside the solution. And then use them within your environment. So what I've done in my case is I've created a copy and I've used a prefix of COE, and then you can see those kind of sitting outside the solution. Just quickly have a, let me show you those as well quickly.
Shonak, just briefly, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
We've got a bit of scratching on your mic again. Would you be able to try and move it around a little bit? I also wondered whether you could just zoom your screen in a little bit more because it's quite small for us.
Okay, sure. Let me do one thing. Let me take the mic off if that makes it better, because it's going to be a problem. Maybe that will.
We can't hear you so well now.
Second. Can you hear me better now?
Keep talking.
Right. Okay. Try and move closer to the mic. Okay. Is that better?
Not too bad. Yeah, just speak up a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Let me zoom in as well.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt.
That's fine. Apologies for the mic. Yeah. So as I was saying, you have to create a copy of these flows. So I've created a copy of these sync flows, if you like. Do not pay attention to these ones because these will come down the line as part of the governance part. But these are the ones that I was talking about. So I've kind of used a prefix of COE, and these are kind of created outside the solution. So these will then start working as part of the platform once you configure and turn them on. So the first one that I was talking about was the sync template. As you can see, this is sorry, let's go back. Sticky fingers. Let me open that up. Let's bring this to life a little bit. So this is the solution, the parent flow that I was talking about. It is actually configured to run once a day. What it does is, the moment it runs, it picks up the information in terms of all the environments that are available. Then it actually populates the environment entity and creates the list of environments that are available in the organization. In my case, there were 3 environments. So if I kind of look at the data part of it and go to the entities, and if I look at the environment entity, let me just open that. It's taking enough time. Yeah, where is that? Let me just go through here. Let me just quickly open that out. Opens. That's your environment entity. So as soon as the flow runs, it actually starts populating the data. So you can see there are 3 environments that exist in my current tenant. And obviously the COE one, which I created as a dedicated one to COE, is there. And you can see number of apps and number of flows that are corresponding to this. Now this is all the configuration-based apps and not the actual kind of development apps that I've created. And this is where I was talking about it might skew your figures when you're actually mixing that up with the other environment. So this is basically then populating the data here. And once the data is populated within these environments entity, the first time it will create the environment, the data will start, the traffic will start flowing, the information will be gathered. And the next time around when this flow runs and updates the environment entity, the rest of the flows will start kicking in. So if I go back quickly and show you a specific flow, let's pick one specific flow that is that will be kicked off as a result of this flow updating the environment entity, and I'll go to
the app one. So if I go to the model-driven app, there is an apps here, this one. So this is basically running every time there is an update to the environment entity. This flow goes and gets the information about all the Canvas apps that might sit in the organization. So as you can see, when it runs, it has run 3 times for me in one go whenever it runs, and that's because it is running per environment. So I had 3 environments. So it goes and gets all the information about all the apps and then gathers that information and puts that in the related Power App entity in terms of what all the apps are. So that's how all the flows are then kind of triggered off in a chain reaction, if you like. That's clear. So let's move on. Now, just to recap, so we've configured the solution, we've configured the environment variables, and now we've configured the flows. Now comes the information that you need to gather in terms of the telemetry data that is existing as part of the Office 365 Compliance Center logs. Because the flow is what the flows were doing that we just configured is getting more information in terms of the actual apps in the flows as and when they're being created. But you also want to gather the information on the usage of these flows or these apps as to how these apps are being used, what is happening with them in terms of usage, in terms of the people who are, how the adoption is working. All that telemetry data is sitting in Office 365. So what we get as part of the COE kit is a managed solution, a second managed solution, which is Center of Excellence Audit Logs, the one that I've kind of mentioned there. It consists of 3 things, a parent and a child audit log flows, and then you have a custom connector for connecting to Office 365. That's because the connector that you have here, there is no out-of-the-box connector to be able to connect to the compliance log. So what Microsoft has provided is indicating a template for a custom connector that you will configure and hook up to the compliance center. It can be configured in 2 ways. You've got 2 options. One is using basic authentication. As part of this COE kit, there is a Swagger file that has been provided. You just need to basically import the solution. You have the custom connector, and then you will import the Swagger file. If you're using option 1, which is using basic authentication, if it's the second option, you will basically create you do the Azure app registration. You will then configure all the parameters that are required in terms of the tenant ID and everything else on the custom connector itself. But obviously the recommended option is to use the Azure app registration and not the basic authentication. Show you the custom connector that is currently existing that I created. I use the basic authentication just to quickly kind of knock that out. That's the one. So that comes as part of the solution, and I configured basic authentication. I imported this Swagger file, and it actually kind of then hooks up to the Office 365 compliance. And obviously, you do need the prerequisite is that you do need access to the Office 365 compliance log. So that is one kind of obviously the prerequisite there. The third part is this third step is only if you are doing the basic authentication, because if you're using the Azure app registration route, then it uses the flows that are already configured or already brought as part of the solution. But if you're using basic authentication, the COE kit has a separate zip file, which basically has a solution that has to be used along with the basic authentication. So you need to import that and then let the flow then talk to Office 365 Compliance Center. Okay, so now we've done that. We've created the environment variables. We've configured all the flows. We've created the custom connector. Now we are ready to push the data onto the CDS instance, which has all the environment entities configured as well. Now, what we do is this was now building a story kind of leading up to the Power BI dashboard that would then exist, which would kind of create all those comprehensive reports that you need as part of your COE kit to take control of what's going on in the environment. I'll explain the Power BI dashboard in a minute in detail, but this kind of gives you an idea of the fact that you've got all these sync flows that are running. You've got the audit log flow that we just looked at, which is basically talking to Office 365 Compliance Center logs. And then the sync flows are obviously talking to the underlying entities that have been populated as part of the sync flows. All that information is then being populated into the CDS instance, all the entities, and that then is being used as a base for the Power BI dashboard to then show the meaningful reports that we need to look at. So that kind of builds the story of how it kind of hooks end to end in terms of configuring the admin module. One more quick point in terms of the Power BI dashboard. So there are two options in which you can configure this. One is you can straight away get the Power BI dashboard from the app source and just point it to the URL of your instance and it will be ready to go. Option two is basically you do have a PBIX file that is provided in the COE kit. So you can take that file and then configure it. Obviously, the advantage of using option two is it gives you more flexibility in terms of modifying the dashboard to your own branding, or including or excluding any pages or visuals that you want. So it gives you more granularity control in terms of how you want it to be tailored to your needs. That we've kind of looked at all end-to-end configuration of the tool. What we quickly look at is a couple of apps that come of this managed solution for administration. You get a DLP editor, Canvas app. What this gives you is, as I was explaining, it helps you to kind of look at all the apps that are using that are part of that are using the connectors, and are those connectors that are being used by these apps, are they business data connectors, or are they non-business data connectors, or if there are any issues in terms of connectors that are not compliant or are supposed to be blocked. So it kind of gives you the view of the landscape of the connectors that are used across the apps, and then that gives you better control in terms of being able to kind of then tell the owners of the apps in terms of what the risks are and communicate with them better. So it kind of gives you that taking stock of the situation of what the DLP policies are and what apps are kind of overlaid against those. Then there is a customizer app that is specifically targeting for custom connectors. And then you can use this to add custom connectors to the business data group of the DLP policy, or to enable HTTP connectors to a DLP policy. So it's kind of specifically targeted for that purpose. Then there is a permissions app, which is basically, as it explains, it's basically setting a new app owner, adding new viewers and editors, changing app permissions, and then changing app permissions from editors to viewers or viewers to editors. In life as well, I had that kind of opened up here. Let me see where that is. Let's just quickly go and look at the apps. Set up permissions, and that's the one. So as you can see, these are the three environments, and if I go into the environment and I choose a specific app, I can just look at, these are obviously provided as part of this user create, but in the real world, you would have the apps that the users have been creating, and you can kind of do the assignment from there. But this one, so for example, I've picked one of those, and you can select the user role, what role do you want, what users you want to add, so you can select the users, and then select the role that this user will have against this app, and that kind of gives you that control in terms of the app to set. Very similar app for that. Very similar app along the same lines is for this one's for Canvas. Final one that I wanted to kind of talk about is the model-driven app that we just mentioned in terms of the Power Platform admin view. That kind of gives you an overview of all the resources that are currently residing in the tenant. It helps you to learn more about all the makers, the connectors, the apps and the flows. It has interactive dashboards like any other standard model-driven app can have to give you that meaningful information. You can drill down and look at the details. And it also kind of gets the information from the audit that we've configured for using the custom connector. Just open the model-driven app as well. That's the model-driven app. And then, as you can see, it gives you all the active makers, active environments, and then it tells you all the apps and gives you that detailed view of all the entities and the connectors and the virtual agents that are existing within the platform. It has extended usage, and I'll do that in the context of a specific use we'll talk about later down the line. Now let's look at the Power BI dashboard that we just talked about. So the Power BI dashboard that we kind of finally configure as a result of all the data that has been gathered, that is divided into the three main sections: monitor, govern, and nurture. So the logical modules that we talked about earlier, it actually has the information gathered from all the three aspects. And that is the kind of landing page where you look at all the three modules, and you can deep dive into the respective areas and look at the information that is available within these data, within the specific dashboard. Just picked a few examples. So first one is the environment overview. It kind of gives you the information in terms of total number of environments, total number of environment makers that exist within the organization, and then obviously the total number of apps that exist and total number of workflows. What I've done is just to give you a better idea in terms of how it is configured. When you actually first download the specific file, the PBIX file, it is actually kind of already having the information that Microsoft would have initially used to gather all that information. So what I've done is I've not intentionally not changed the connection to my instance, so that I can show you the dashboards in a more real life data. So taking an example of the environment overview, if I go back, so that's where the introduction dashboard would reside. You would then kind of drill down into the environment overview, and if I go to the environments tab here, as you can see, this is using the data that was available when I initially downloaded the files. It has a couple of environments available and tons of users who've been creating apps. So you can see that Megan Gowan here has been creating a lot of apps and has been very active in all the environments. Shows you the right split of apps and flows that are existing, and then obviously total number of apps split across the different environments. So it kind of gives you the detailed drill down view in that sense. Then this is basically deep dive into the specific apps area. That was basically collation of all the assets, not just specifically Canvas or monitoring apps, but this is purely concentrating on the apps itself. It also gives you a split by the departments, the creation trend, so that kind of gives you a better idea, and you can detail. It also has an inbuilt Canvas app, which kind of gives you more control in terms of being able to filter and then a similar dashboard along the same lines is basically the one that is for the flows. I have another one for app risk assessment. We will come to that in a minute, how you do the app risk assessment, but this is basically a dashboard that is then looking on all the apps that are falling in the risk criteria and giving you an overview of those particular apps. Then we have the nurture part. So what we have here is I've picked out one for the makers. So it basically kind of shows you a view of all the makers that are currently active within the environment, from the point of view of then giving you a view of who are the most active users and how they're kind of using the platform to their benefit, so they can actually be picked and used as evangelists for other users to train them out. So that kind of gives you the now this is quickly giving you an overview of the second one. So we've done the administration part. Now we're looking at the governance aspect. In the governance aspect, you again have a couple of flows that are available. You have the apps, as you can see on the top. You have an approval flow specifically. This is of specific importance because as the apps are being created, what the kit gives you is a process flow to basically look at the apps that are being submitted for creation, and then you go through the approval process to make sure that it satisfies a specific checklist and it is compliant. And once you're happy with all the prerequisites, then you can publish the app for the rest of the organization to see. So they've actually built an end-to-end story for you to be able to do that. What I've done is I've created an example that we'll see in the next slide, but this is basically kind of giving you an overview of what the core components give you. And then there is a SharePoint library. Once you've identified the candidates for the apps that are ready to be archived because they haven't been used for X number of days, or they haven't been active, or there is no business justification for them, they can then be moved to the SharePoint library where they're ready to be archived, kind of thing. is the example that I was kind of talking about. What I've tried to do is show you an overlap between the three modules. So you have the administration, governance, and nurture modules coming into play, working together against a specific process here. So this is an app auditing process where we start with a flow that iterates through all the apps that are present in the environment. It looks at a certain set criteria. I think the criteria is something like if they haven't been active for 60 odd days or something, and they haven't been used for 60 odd days, and a few of the criteria that I don't remember right now, but it looks at all that criteria and then identifies the apps that need to be kind of cleaned up. And then it goes through the process of identifying, but this process is more in terms of the new apps that are being onboarded. So let's start with the first thing that you do is basically it looks at all the apps, and then it emails to the app owners to telling them that these apps are not compliant, and then the flow sends the email to the owner notifying that the app is not compliant with the company's policy. The app owner then goes to the developer compliance center, looks at the justification details that they need to provide for the app to be compliant. And once that is done, then there is a model-driven app for the back office for the COE administrators to be able to look at the justification provided. And once they are satisfied with the data that has been provided by the app owners, they can choose to publish the app in the app catalog. And then that kind of becomes available in the app catalog for everyone in the organization to see. With an example, what I've done is I've actually an app which is configured. Let me move to the compliance center first. So let's imagine that the flow has run, the starting flow is run. It has identified the app that needs to be looked at from compliance perspective, and it is then created an email that has gone to the app owner to provide the right justification. So this is the app that I have created. When I get the email, and on the back of the email, which has the link to the Development Compliance Center, I go into the specific app that I created, click on the details, and then I see, okay, I have filled out the description, I've published it within 60 days, that's fine, but I haven't submitted any supporting details, and that's why it's showing as amber. So what I need to do is basically act on this, provide the relevant information that has to be provided. Once I've done that and I've submitted it, it then goes into the back office, which is, let me just quickly go to the model-driven app. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the app. And this is the process that you then go through once the app details have been provided. It gives you the details of, okay, what connections it is using. I've used a LinkedIn connector. It shows who it is shared with, have they provided all the details that need to be provided in terms of the compliance. It goes through the assessment process. Once you've done that, there is a option to say whether I want to publish this into the catalog. And does it need to be a featured app so that everyone can kind of see what are the featured apps of the month or of the day kind of thing. Once the COE administrator has gone through that process and provided the compliance needs in it, it's passed all the stages, and they've published that app into the app catalog. This is the app catalog that the whole organization will have access to, and they'll be able to see all the apps that have recently been featured or that exist within the app catalog. So when I switched the button on in terms of publishing, it starts appearing here, and I can then go and see the details of that specific app. So that kind of gives you an end-to-end journey of being able to submit it for compliance, and goes through the compliance process using the backend model-driven app, and then it gets published into the app catalog for everyone to kind of look at in terms of what it consists of. And then finally, I'm just looking at the time. I think I'm just very close to the finishing time. Just rushed through these as well. So you've got the nurture components where you've got There are a couple of flows that exist there as well. For a welcome email, as you create a new app, it also gives you there is a user scenario that is for basically training management in this as well. I'll explain that in a minute. But there are a couple of new entities that are introduced as part of this solution. So in a day attendees and in a day event, those are the new entities that are introduced as part of this component. These are basically the entities that are used for coordinating the whole training process that you want to do within your organization for skilling people on the apps. I'll quickly run through that. So when there is a model-driven, there's a Canvas app for being able to kind of create new trainings that you want to run in your organization. I'll do that app quickly and show you the details there. So this is an app to kind of manage the trainings that you want to run within your organization. I just created a sample one here, and I'll just walk you through that. So this is just a sample Power Platform in a day event that I've created. And what I can see is all the users that kind of register for this training will start appearing here. And how the users register for this training is this Canvas app that has been created in a phone layout format, which the users can use to see all the recent events that are available or the trainings that are available for them to register. Once they start registering, the attendees will start appearing here. And once they start seeing all the attendees, and the users can then manage the registration and the event from this Canvas app as we looked. And once that happens, the flows will then start sending the emails to the specific attendees for the confirmation of their attendance. And then there will be a subsequent flow that we run 3 days prior to the event, reminding them of the event. And on the day of the event, there'll be another flow that will send them a feedback form. And that feedback form is available as a template as part of Forms Pro. So they've given a template for using Forms Pro, which you can use in the feedback form. And that's one here, which is basically available out of the box with WCOE. So you can manage an entire end-to-end process in terms of the training using this. Now, finally, moving on to the limitations. There are a few limitations that need to be aware of as part of the COE kit. One thing is in terms of the main parent flow that I talked about, which basically triggers the gathering of the data in terms of the environments. If you see 4 to 9 errors, which is basically if you have too many calls going out from your flow to the Office 365 users connector, and you are hitting the limits, that's when you see the 4 to 9 error coming up. The way to kind of get around that is either you configure the retry policy, or you configure the concurrency in the for each loop. So you need to reduce the degree of parallelism to be able to fine tune that. That's one thing that you need to be aware of if you start seeing those errors. A few other things. DLP customizer, that tool doesn't work for custom connectors that are installed as part of a managed solution. The COE starter kit for government community cloud, the custom connector to connect to Office 365 logs isn't available for the GCC environments yet. And another piece is that the embedding of the Power Apps in the Power BI dashboards that are available to be embedded, that don't work in the GCC environments. And also in terms of the sync flow, it's not currently possible to retrieve model-driven apps for developer environments. You can only do it for non-developer environments. And then finally, the custom connector shipped as part of the solution. As part of the solution is the business-only data group of DLP because you need to use the PowerShell CMD-lets to be able to kind of configure them. You can't use the app to do the configuration for the custom connectors. And the theming components, which I haven't talked about because I guess that's very straightforward, and in interest of time, I don't think I would have been able to cover those, but there's a limitation around those as well in terms of they're not editable. So you need to make your own copy and expand the theming component that come as part of the component library. So that's basically the limitations, and that's pretty much it from my side in terms of content that I had to cover. I guess we have about, I think we're almost there in terms of the time.
Yeah, I think we're done. Just a bit of feedback there. Yes, thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. I had no real idea of how big it was, to be honest. Starter kit there, and also how much it made use of Flow and Power Automate and everything else. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the session. We do have a couple of minutes before we finish for lunch, but I just want to thank Shonak for putting the session together. Obviously, we've recorded this session, and also we'll share the slides as well, because there's lots of information on those slides. No questions that I can see. I actually had one question, which is a quick one, hopefully. Can you use this to look at usage, like user adoption of model-driven apps?
Yes, you can. So I think so you have the flow that runs as part of the, basically gathers information, not just.
Well, your audio is dropping in and out, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
So you do have the flows that I talked about in the initial administration component. With those flows, there are two flows. One specifically to gather information about the Canvas apps, and the other one at the model-driven app. But both of them hit the same entity, and there's a flag which tells you whether it's a model-driven app or a Canvas app. But there are dedicated flows for each of them.
Okay, awesome. I need to take a look at that, I think. Yeah, just remains to say thanks very much again to Shonak for putting the session together. Really appreciate that. Loads of effort has gone into this, obviously, but thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, everyone, for being here and patiently listening. I know there's a lot to cram in this one, so it wasn't the easiest of content.
Oh, no, thank you. Appreciate it. So